Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's Engaging for Missouri webinar. I'm Alice Roach from the University of Missouri, and I will be your host today. With each of these 30-minute presentations, we intend to share research-based insights that leaders like you can apply in your own work to benefit and strengthen the state's agriculture and food system, hospitality sector, economy, communities, and families. Today, Dr. Willi Meyers joins us to speak about Ukraine's agriculture industry and how conflict in the country may affect agricultural production and markets into the future. Before I invite him to begin, however, I do want to share a few housekeeping items. First, we'll close today with a Q&A session. Those of you who have connected today via your computers may submit your questions in the chat screen. If you joined today by phone, then you may email me your questions at roacham@missouri.edu. Second, all attendees are muted and may not start their video. Third, if you encounter any technical problems during today's presentation, then you can let me know by either submitting a comment in the chat screen, or you can also send me an email at roacham@missouri.edu, and I'll do my best to help you troubleshoot. And last, we will make a recording of today's presentation plus the slides available. You can look for an email tomorrow that shares more about where you can access those details. And you can also find an archive of all of our previous Engaging for Missouri webinars on our Division of Applied Social Sciences YouTube channel. So with that, we'll transition to the topic of today's presentation, which is titled Ukraine's Growing Role in Global Agriculture and Possible Impacts of Conflict. Presenting today is Dr. Willi Meyers, who is a professor emeritus of agricultural and applied economics. During his career, Dr. Meyers has hosted visiting faculty from Ukraine and co-authored numerous publications summarizing Ukraine agriculture and agricultural education. So thank you, Willi, for presenting today. If you could please unmute your microphone and start your video, then we can begin today's presentation.
Hi. Thanks very much, Alice. I'm really glad to be here, and I want to welcome everybody. And I'm going to say that I'm going to try to move pretty fast because I have a lot of slides as usual, but I want to allow time for questions. So if you have questions at the end, maybe moving fast is a good thing. First of all, I want to mention, because Alice mentioned the Ukrainians that we have hosted over the years. As far as I know, they're all okay. One of them has gone to the Czech Republic, one to Iceland, and Olha, who was in the first group in 2016, wrote that they moved out of town. She lived in Irpin, which was in the news an awful lot at the beginning, and she said their house was totally destroyed, but they had with them whatever they took, the papers and their personal possessions. So they're in great difficulty, but as far as I know, they are safe as of now. I post this picture because just today or yesterday, I got a picture from the Orbitz family that was here in 2016, and they are out planting. So at least in some places and some people, they can plant their crop. And I'll say a little bit more about that as we go along. So I'd like us to try to put ourselves in their shoes if we can, because most of us in this country, we haven't experienced this kind of situation in our lifetimes. So try to imagine where they are and what's happening there. And what I'd like to, I got a lot of things to talk about here, but I'll try to cover them, as I said, pretty fast, and then we can come back and ask questions of what you're interested. But I want to start with how Ukraine's role in agricultural trade has been growing so much over the past couple of decades, and then talk about some of the near-term impacts. We hear a lot on the news about these, so I'll go rather fast. I may have some things that you haven't seen, but most of them you may have seen elsewhere. And then a little bit about longer-term impacts. So let's get started. Ukraine is a big country, and I put the arrow in because it would be better if this was situated over Iowa and Illinois, because of the land quality and type of agriculture they have is much closer to this Midwest, although other people have said Ukraine is the size of Texas, which helps us to see the scale of it, to think of the scale of it as well. And these maps are come from the FAS, and I put an arrow here because this is where the Waterbets farm is. It's right in the middle, and they can grow almost anything where they are. And it's not so far from this river, which is the main, what used to be until the war, one of the main routes for exports to go. But their farm is right in here, and that's probably why they may be able to go out and do some planting. I want to mention, you know, the fact that we're not used to being in a country where agriculture is so important. So I think we have to realize that for Ukraine, this is a really important sector. And these percentages I put up here, they're a couple of years old, so they might have actually gone up some, but to think that agriculture as a share of GDP is 20% and it's 40% of exports. So it's a really, really important part of the whole economy in Ukraine. It's been one of the most dynamic parts of the economy since their independence in 1992. And I know there's going to be questions about farms, so I'll throw this up and I won't spend a lot of time on it, but if you look at, can you see the pointer, Alice? Yeah, I hope you can see the pointer.
Yes.
The Horebets farm is right in here. It's probably about 2,500 hectares, something like that. And these are the kind of farms that maybe we're used to, the fairly large Midwest farms of a couple thousand hectares or so. But they also have a very large number of what we call agri holdings, which are these like 10,000 or more, and many of those are 100,000, 50,000 hectares and run by corporations. So that's an important part of their agricultural system. This is one of my favorite charts, so bear with me a little bit, because during the last 30 years, Russia and Ukraine's export, these are just total exports of grains, excluding rice, have gone up to almost 25%, let's say 24% of total, while the US, you know, we were diverting a lot of our grains into, especially corn, into ethanol and things like that. So these countries have played a really important role, and their agriculture has expanded. And I think they have more room to expand because their yields are still not that great, but they have been improving a lot. So this was a WASDE report in February. That was before the war. Ukraine this was an estimate for the current crop year that isn't finished yet, but you know, the 14% for Ukraine, the second only to the US, and about 10% for Russia. And those two together, you know, about 24% of total grain exports. And then I put in here, the last WASDE was April the 8th, and you can see how much they have changed, quite a decline in the estimate for Ukraine. And that's probably going to go down some more because who knows, you know, when the war is going to end. Russia down a little bit, and then Australia and US up. And I'm putting question marks here because maybe next in the next WASDE report, which will come out soon, I think this week, we might see some more shifts like that. So definitely prices are up, but also there's a shift in who's exporting what. And this gives another picture of the shares. Red is Russia and blue is Ukraine. Barley is pretty big. Wheat is pretty big. but the big one here is sunflower oil. And that's, roughly 50%, more than 50% of the market share. And of course, so that you might expect that the impact on vegetable oils might be bigger even than the impact on grains. And another important thing, because we're in the closing months of the current crop year, and these charts, which are a couple of weeks old already, show how much is not yet exported. So the dashed lines here for Russia and Ukraine indicate uncertainty about whether that can be exported. What's going to happen to the current crop year that's still not exported from the country, but was expected to be exported. So it's not only next year's crop, which is an issue, but also how much of this year's crop is going to make it out of the country. And there are a lot of stories now about Russia taking Ukrainian grain and exporting it and things like that. So there's a lot of moving targets. And I have a few quick items on that score. This is Alana Sentowska, who is with the APK Inform, one of maybe the best agricultural consulting companies in Ukraine. So she posts things quite a bit, and there's a couple of them here I'm just going to show. This is from another person that was posting, and then this one from the infrastructure, because some of the storage and warehousing things have been also hit by the Russian missiles. And then this came out just this week, the estimates from the ministry on how much that they've been able to plant in the new crop year. So it's really low if you look at the yellow part, what was planted as compared with the with what was the say last year's plantings of corn, sunflower, and soy and barley and so on. A few items of the also from Lana, talking about different things that are happening in the current situation in terms of granaries being hit, planting and exports being impacted. And there was one just today, I think, or yesterday at the bottom here. There were things about Russians stealing agricultural machinery from the area that's occupied in this southeastern part of Ukraine, especially. And of course, with the modern machinery, it's a little bit different. And it says that some of the farmers, after the stuff was stolen, they disabled it. They disabled it electronically, so it couldn't be used. So I thought that was a little, the Ukrainians are very innovative, I would say. And then there have been stories about Russians stealing grain from Ukraine and exporting it themselves or shipping it off to other places. And I ask about this story. I have a lot of URLs in here, which you can look at later if you want to go back to the presentation. I'm going to open them now. But Maria Boganos is a Ukrainian who is leading the analytical group. It's sort of a FAPRI type group in Ukraine that is now she's in Sevilla in Spain, but they're still doing their analysis of Ukraine. And I asked her if this was true, that about what I read in the Eurasian press, and she thought it was probably a reliable story. Here's some more recent ones, including our own Pat Westhoff, and that's a place that you can always get good information. And I'm going to look a little bit about this Financial Times story, which was really interesting and covered more about the problem of shipping stuff by rail, because now that they can't ship out of the Black Sea anymore. And then there are some other sources of information that I'm going to show a little bit from there. But one of the big issues, they have shipped some things out through Poland, and one of the farmers on a program that I heard from Europe said that the problem with the Gdansk port in Poland, it doesn't have big enough ships that can't handle the big ships. But also there's a big problem moving things by rail, partly because of the different gauge between the former Soviet Union and the European countries are different. And so when you either have to unload and reload everything, or you have to change the wheels on the train. And I actually never heard about what these things are called, but look at this. They're called bogies. So if you lift up the train car and you change the wheels from one place to another, and some of the border places have facilities to do that, you can avoid moving the goods from one train car to another by just changing the wheels, although that also takes time and money. So jumping into the prices, which I'm going to go to next. I'm running a little bit late, so I'm going to hurry again. There's a lot of price pictures, so I just want to point out that some of these are based on an index from 2014 to 16, which is right here, another low price point. And some are based on an index from about 2000. So this is the FAO, the kind of World Food Price Index. And this is an FAO picture, which shows, and I mark in some of these to show that as I think many of us know, this price increase started before the war. And the war has in some ways accelerated the price increase that was already going on. So I've got a bunch of lines in here to show that. Here's another one with an index of 2014-16. This is also from the International Grain Council. And this line is when the war started. So there was a bit of a dip, but then after that, prices have gone up. And now more recently, they have softened a little bit. And you can see that rice is not at all involved in this issue, but for most of us, we can shift from wheat products to rice, at least in our household. But a lot of parts of the world, they're not going to be shifting from rice to from wheat or corn products to rice. There'll be some of that, but that's probably not an easy thing to do for many people. Some more pictures showing the tapering of the price surge in most of these, and we have to wait and see if that tapering is going to continue. At least the wheat, the sharp price wheat has been tapered off quite a bit. Now I want to jump into another important issue, which is food security, and I'm sure many of you realize that the COVID issue has already, look at these increases in food insecurity measurement here the last couple of years because of COVID. And this year, the estimates, this is from FAO, are even worse. So this is coming, for many of these countries, coming at a time when food insecurity has already gotten a lot worse than it was the last couple of years. And these are the countries that, from FAO, that I've marked, I've kind of circled the main ones, but where Ukraine is in orange and Russia is in blue. But a lot of these, if you go down to Eritrea, for example, 100% depending on these countries for their supplies in the past. Of course, people can shift buying from somebody else, but that because of the higher cost of transport is just going to make their grain imports more expensive. This is another good report you can look up. Yamo just came out with this, and it has a lot of things about trade and prices, and also about the fact that some countries are beginning to restrict their exports, which is one of the no-nos when you're in a situation like this. So for countries that were importing from Russia and Ukraine, we can expect problems both in terms of shifting to different suppliers at a higher cost, as well as the dollar is strengthening, so the price also for many of them would go up in their own currencies. Now on the energy side, very quickly, another big issue now is the fertilizer and chemicals industry related to the rise in petroleum prices. Another one from FAPRI showing how fertilizer prices have increased. Again, this started before the war, but the war has exacerbated this. This is another price chart from Amos. This is Agricultural Market Information System, where, by the way, Seth Meyer is now the head of this. I mean, they changed the head from year to year, but he's currently in charge of this program. But it involves most of the grain exporting countries, including Ukraine. So they also have prices. And this is one showing the percent change in prices in fertilizer products. And these pictures show where this is from from IFPRI, David Laborde at IFPRI, showing again where the heaviest dependence on Russia and Belarus are, which again is some of the same areas that were seen in the previous charts, where food security is a big problem. So I'm winding down, talking about near-term impacts, prices, what's going to happen to planting harvest in the coming year, which is a big unknown. And I mentioned a couple of times here what happened in 2007-8, where some countries reacted to the price surge by restricting exports and things which made it much worse. And a lot of people are now saying, let's not get into that problem again, and encouraging countries not to do that. So there's a lot of unknowns. We don't know how long the war is going to go. We don't know how the recovery will go, and how long this disruption in production and trade will go on. We do, I think, already people are talking about a new Marshall Plan for Ukraine to reconstruct and rebuild, but how long that will take also depends on what happens between now and when the war will end. So I'm going to put up this do's and don'ts that came from an IFPRI, and you can also look at the URL from IFPRI, which is very good, Joe Glauber and David Laborde. But these are useful things to think about in terms of policy, because they again, right from the experience that was in the last food crisis, 2007-8. And I'm going to leave that up and stop here and go to your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Willi, for presenting. We do have several questions popping up in the chat screen. If you have a question, then please go ahead and add it there. We do have time to address several questions today. So Willi, to get started, one attendee mentioned that there was a comment that Russia was negotiating with countries like Georgia and Armenia about re-exporting Russian goods. Wouldn't those countries be concerned that when Russia is done in Ukraine, that they might target them next?
Well, they've already targeted them. I mean, at least Georgia, by taking over a couple of pieces of their territory a number of years ago. I think it was 2007 or something. But yeah, that is definitely an issue, and I don't know. I've seen that story too, but I don't know any more about it than they do.
Great, thank you. Can you comment on the impacts of the Ukrainian war on US food price inflation going forward?
I would think that it has because of its effect on the global prices, it will have an effect on our prices as well. And I think, as I showed in the chart, the price surge is tapering off a little bit now that maybe people are a little bit getting, understanding better how this thing might play out. But the problem is we still don't know very much about what Ukraine will be able to plant. You know, in the world trade situation, there's always substitution possibilities going on. It means that people have to source their grain in other places, and the cost will probably go up. But I wouldn't expect a big impact more than what we've already seen. And that also, I mean, there's so many things going on. It's not just Ukraine, it's the fertilizer price situation, and other countries. I think Russia's already done some restricting on their exports. And I also read that Indonesia has restricted some of their palm oil exports. So part of this whole effect on us and everybody else will be how much countries, you know, what kind of reaction they make in their own trade regimes.
Great. Thanks for those comments. Do you have any comment about how much crop yields in Ukraine may be affected in the short term if they don't have access to fertilizer and labor that they need?
Well, definitely that's going to have an effect. I mean, so it's not just the planting that's been disrupted and reduced. It's the level of what inputs they're going to have available. And one person from Ukraine told me that they usually have about 80% of their inputs, you know, before planting time. So they might have had, some of them may have already had that. But they would have difficulty getting it now if they didn't already have it in their warehouses.
Great. Another question here is, removing biofuel mandates possible?
Sorry, what is that again?
It's referring, I think, to the first do in your chart that you have up here. Is removing biofuel mandates possible?
Oh, I have no idea. I mean, I think what they're saying is, you know, if we have policies that can relieve the pressure, you know, like we already went to 15%. Ethanol has been extended for the summer, so that's a little bit of a relief. One of those things in there, some people were suggesting that we get rid of let the CRP land be planted, but I think most people feel that that's not very good land anyway, and it's not a very good idea to go that way. I think that's what they're getting at in there, and the mandates, I guess, removing the mandates would take some of the pressure off of the vegetable oil markets, but whether that's possible, I don't really know.
Great. In your opening slide, you challenged us to think about what it would feel like to be a Ukrainian farmer. So perhaps to help us do that, could you help us picture how Ukrainian farms compare and contrast with US farms in terms of how well they're diversified or specialized, how well they're mechanized, the characteristics of their principal operators, and so forth?
Yeah, it's quite diverse. I mentioned that I threw in that slide to give that impression. The Horovitz farm that I showed, that's a lot like our Midwest farms, you know, pretty big, pretty mechanized, pretty modern. In fact, when they were over here, they visited there's an Iowa company that does a lot of the management support system that they use over there too. So those guys are very similar to our big Midwestern farms. And then you have the big corporate farms where they have organized these as breaking up they have a lot of farms spread out over an area, maybe managed under the same system, but with different managements in different parts, in 10,000 hectare units or something like this. And those guys are very, you know, they've got the latest stuff and very modern, just like the Orbis people. But then you have, when you get to the smaller farms, you have quite a bit of production of products in farms that are much smaller and maybe in the order of 10 to 20 hectares. So it's a big variety, but you can see from that first chart I showed that it's all shifting, as it does here too, from smaller to bigger over time and more industrialized. And some of these are run by Germans and Dutch farmers, you know, who come in to manage those farms and organize them.
Great.
And Americans too, probably.
We have time for one last question, and that is, are there any indications if countries that rely on Ukraine or maybe even Russia, are they trying to source their imports from other countries? Have you heard anything about that?
Yes, I've heard about on the vegetable oils, you know, shifting to Latin America, sourcing. One of the people was encouraging Argentina to reduce its export taxes to help soften the pressure on vegetable oil prices. You know, as you may know, Argentina has a habit of taxing its exports to raise money, and that most countries, exporting countries, don't do that. But I think they're under some pressure to reduce those to help mitigate the situation.
Great. Well, thanks, Willi, for presenting and for taking our questions, and thanks to our audience for joining us. You'll see a post-webinar survey will either have already loaded in your browser or it will pop up after you close Zoom. Please consider responding to that survey, as we'll use the results to improve the webinar experience and also brainstorm future webinar topics. Again, you should receive a recorded copy of today's presentation plus the slides tomorrow via email. Mark your calendars for our next Engaging for Missouri webinar on June 29th. Dr. Dae-Young Kim and PhD candidate Jae-Jin Baby will speak about enhancing the economic sustainability of Missouri agritourism. Again, thanks for joining us, and I hope you have a great Wednesday. Thanks again, Willi.
Thank you, everybody.